Welcome everyone to our program, Israel's Humanitarian Work Around the Globe, Government and Civil Society Actors. Here's B'nai B'rith International Chair of United Nations Affairs, Millie Maggid.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the Diplomatic Corps, my name is Millie Maggid, and I serve as Chair of United Nations Affairs at B'nai B'rith International. It is my honor to welcome you to this special program. These days, it is all too easy to be consumed by negative news, by stories of disasters and division. In the Middle East in particular, for decades, press coverage was dominated by one narrative, that of conflict between Israel and its Arab neighbors. Although such conflict has been a part of the picture, it is not the entire picture. We're deeply encouraged by the recent strides that have been made in relations between Israel and many of its immediate and nearby neighbors. Not only Egypt, but now also the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan of cooperation and peace to the benefit of all the peoples of the region. For friends and close observers of Israel, it has in fact long been known just how much Israel and its people have to offer, not only in the Middle East, but the world beyond. A small but remarkably dynamic and diverse country, the Jewish state, the Middle East's only pluralistic democracy, has since the time of its birth, nearly 73 years ago, contributed tremendously to the arts, literature, agriculture innovation, medical technology, and not least humanitarian aid, in keeping with the lofty spirit of Israel's Declaration of Independence. It is this global humanitarian work, both by government and civil society actors, that we focus on today. We hope that Israel's best practices can be emulated by others, and that this program will help inspire new partnerships in such a critical arena. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I now turn the floor over to David Michaels, B'nai B'rith's Director of UN and Intercommunal Affairs, to introduce our distinguished speakers.
Well, thank you very much, Millie, and thank you all for being with us. We're joined today by three very prominent leaders in Israeli humanitarian action and are very fortunate to gain from their experience and expertise. Ambassador Eynat Shlein, head of Mashav, Israel's Agency for International Development Cooperation, Yotam Polizer, CEO of IsraAID, and Alan Schneider, director of our B'nai B'rith World Center in Jerusalem. Time permitting, we do hope to have a few audience questions after all three panelists have made their remarks. However, please feel free at any point to put your question into the queue by clicking on the Q&A button on your screen. To kick off our conversation, I'd like to ask my colleague, Alan Schneider, to speak a bit about Israeli engagement in humanitarian assistance worldwide and the part that he and B'nai B'rith have played in such endeavors. Alan Schneider, again, is director of the B'nai B'rith World Center in Jerusalem, a position he has held since 1989. A native of Brooklyn, New York, Alan immigrated to Israel in 1972. He completed his law studies at Bar Ilan University, and he's been a member of the Israel Bar from 1985 and of the New York Bar since 1988. He was a law associate at the Office of O'Connor and Hannon in Washington in 1986, and was assistant director of the New York Regional Office of the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith from 1987 to 1988. Alan is a recipient of the B'nai B'rith Bisno Award for Outstanding Professional Excellence. He's initiated many innovative projects in Israel and collaborative efforts with B'nai B'rith affiliates around the world. These have included an annual Journalism Award for Excellence in Diaspora Reporting, an annual survey of Israeli attitudes toward diaspora Jewry, and sustained cooperation with Israeli humanitarian organizations in an effort to expand the scope of Israeli humanitarian projects internationally. He also initiated and coordinated B'nai B'rith's assistance to residents of Israel's north and south during and following the Second Lebanon War and Operation Cast Lead. He was a member of the steering committee of the Israeli President's Forum on the Diaspora and a member of the coordinating forum for countering anti-Semitism at the Office of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Alan serves as coordinator of B'nai B'rith's delegation to the World Zionist Organization and Jewish Agency. Along with Professor Gerald Steinberg, he established NGO Monitor. He is also a founding member of 2 international Holocaust memorial projects, Unto Every Person There Is a Name, and the Committee to Recognize Jews Who Rescued Jews During the Holocaust. He founded the Israel Hellenic Forum, which fosters relations between the peoples of the 3 democracies in the Eastern Mediterranean, Israel, Cyprus, and Greece. And he reestablished the Christian-Jewish Liaison Committee together with Reverend Dr. Petra Helt. Not least, Alan was a founding member of IsraAID, which has had him take part in relief work around the world. Alan, the floor is yours.
Well, David, thank you for that very kind introduction. It really is a pleasure for me to be here with you and with 2 dear friends and consummate professionals to speak about the role of the Israeli government and Israeli civil society in projecting humanitarian aid beyond Israel's borders. Eynat Shlein and Yotam Polizer together represent the 2 powerhouses of Israeli humanitarian aid from the governmental and non-governmental sectors. They and the professionals who work with them have assisted countless people in developing countries and in places hit by natural disaster. Now, while this work undeniably helps Israel build its soft power image around the world, as someone closely affiliated with this work, as you mentioned, David, I can attest that in the field, the dedicated professionals of Mashav and IsraAID are motivated by a deep sense of dedication to those who can benefit from training offered abroad and in Israel, and from direct disaster relief provided in so many different fields of operation. I'm sure that we will hear from Eynat and Yotam about what their organizations have accomplished and how both have retooled in the last year to adapt to the Corona era. Now, as a founding member of IsraAID and still involved 20 years later, I was there for the early discussions over the form the organization would assume, and I even take credit actually for giving the organization its name. IsraAID quickly evolved into B'nai B'rith's main partner in delivering humanitarian aid. The principle made so much sense at the time and still holds true today, that money generated by Jewish organizations and communities in the diaspora should go, at least in part, to promoting Israel's true good image among the nations. With this exceptional track record, IsraAID has also gained the respect of governments and multinational organizations such as the UN, and much of its funding comes today from those sources. I participated personally in many of the early missions undertaken by IsraAID to some of the hardest hit disaster destinations. Now, while preparing and participating in these missions, some of which included a degree of danger, whether from desperate survivors, enemy soldiers, marauders, or the aftershocks, or unexpected events, like the kidnapping of children in Chad for adoption in France by French nationals that caught us in Chad at the time. I was always inspired by 2 things. The first is B'nai B'rith's long record of engaging in humanitarian aid projects going back to 1865, when Moses Montefiore called on the organization to contribute toward his efforts to fight an outbreak of cholera in the land of Israel. Significantly, this marked the starting point for what is now a 156-year strong tradition of engaging in and supporting humanitarian activities by B'nai B'rith. Second, are the stirring words of the main protagonist in Theodor Herzl's 1902 novel, Alt Neuland, about a future Jewish state. And here I'm quoting from the book. There is still one other question arising out of the disaster of nations, which remains unsolved to this day, and whose profound tragedy only a Jew can comprehend. This is the African question. I am not ashamed to say, though I may expose myself to ridicule for saying so, that once I have witnessed the redemption of the Jews, my people, I wish also to assist in the redemption of the Africans. End quote from Theodor Herzl's Alt Neuland. So from my experience, a signature characteristic of Israeli humanitarian missions has been an overriding respect for local mores, traditions, and sensitivities while doggedly pursuing their assignment. I've experienced the compassion with which rescue teams enter disaster areas and sought out local partners even in the midst of death and destruction. In many cases, these relationships formed in those times lasted way beyond the emergency and flowered into a long-term presence for IsraAID in that country. And in the case of Mashav, many alumni of its programs have gone on to take leadership roles in their countries and to forge a special relationship with the state of Israel. Another signature of IsraAID, and I assume also this is true of Mashav, is that we do not operate clandestinely, where the Israeli flag cannot be proudly raised. This goes in tandem with my earlier point of working closely with local, national, and multinational institutions and organizations. Such a task cannot be successfully undertaken without openness and transparency as to who is providing the financial aid and who is providing aid on the ground. Even in the case of the material assistance we provided to Syrian refugees in Bulgaria, every package was proudly marked from IsraAID and B'nai B'rith. Now, I'm proud to say that many of IsraAID's early missions, even those that took place before the organization was incorporated, were financed largely by B'nai B'rith, jumpstarting what has become Israel's largest international humanitarian aid organization. These include a fact-finding mission to the Darfurian refugee camps in Chad, with which Israel had no diplomatic relations at the time, and subsequent activities undertaken there in cooperation with the UN. Humanitarian aid following the Southeast Asia tsunami in 2004, assistance to Somali refugees in Kenya in 2007, aid to villagers hit by Cyclone Nargis in Myanmar in 2008, the preparation of 3,000 meals daily to Georgian refugees in Gori in the summer of 2008, the Haiti earthquake in 2010, the Japan tsunami and earthquake in 2011, and the Philippine typhoon in 2013. B'nai B'rith has contributed to many other IsraAID projects, of one of which in the Bahamas has been pending since COVID-19 interrupted its implementation. It was during these missions that I became a strong believer in the imperative of Israeli international humanitarian aid, whether governmental or civilian. This was particularly the case when I represented IsraAID at UN-sponsored meetings of all NGOs operating in Myanmar and Sri Lanka at the time of the disasters that hit those countries. It was meaningful for Israel to be represented among the leading Western countries that had sent teams to assist in their areas of competence. I also vividly remember when a US Army detachment in full battle gear entered the playing field of Haiti's National Stadium to offer supplies to our small medical team that we had set up in a clinic there. The officer, surprised to find Israelis in downtown Port-au-Prince, told us that we were the only foreign medical team operating in the city. The others were locked down at the airport by order of the UN, who warned that it was dangerous for foreign teams to operate in the city, something that we did not experience at all during our stay in Haiti. The following day, a military helicopter landed in the pitch of the stadium with all the supplies our team needed to carry on its mission. Now, although I have focused my comments so far on Mashav and IsraAID, Israel's international humanitarian environment is actually very diverse. The Israeli branch of SID, the Society for International Development, which is a global forum of individuals and organizations in the field of sustainable economic and social development, founded in 1957, numbers no less than 130 member organizations. SID aims to galvanize Israeli society to broad involvement in the fields of international development and foreign aid. It holds professional trainings, capacity building, and local and international networking sessions. The members of SID Israel range from university programs to law firms, agricultural associations, medical innovators, trade associations, and even medical clowns, investment companies, and many others. To encourage Israeli involvement in the developing world, SID has established a database that allows easy access to information and experts in many relevant fields. And SID will shortly begin a groundbreaking four-week training session on the UN's many aid agencies with the aim of preparing Israeli aid professionals and business executives to interact effectively with these major international aid providers. Now, before I end, I'd just like to take a look at two other notable Israeli humanitarian efforts. The first is called Innovation Africa, that brings Israeli solar, water, and agricultural innovations to rural African villages. Founded in 2008, the organization has completed over 300 projects, providing light and clean water to 1.8 million people in 10 African countries. In 2012, Innovation Africa was granted special consultative status at the United Nations Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC. And the following year, the organization was awarded the United Nations Innovation Award. The second organization is Save a Child's Heart. This Israeli NGO is dedicated to saving the lives of critically ill children in developing countries suffering from heart disease. Since 1997, Save a Child's Heart has treated over 5,000 children, approximately 50% of them from the Palestinian Authority in Gaza, Iraq, and Morocco, more than 40% from Africa, and the remainder from Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Americas. Save a Child's Heart also trains medical professionals from around the world in all facets of pediatric cardiac care. To date, Save a Child's Heart has also conducted 30 surgical missions and more than 70 cardiology clinics around the world, examining and diagnosing over 9,500 children. So I'm personally gratified to have played a constructive role in expanding Israel's international aid footprint since I was approached by IsraAID founding director Shachar Zahavi over 20 years ago to join him in turning IsraAID into a reality. And I'm hopeful that as the pall of Corona rises, that all Israeli humanitarian organizations will be able to get back to their famous programs that have touched so many around the world. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Alan, for all of your work and for those insights. We're now privileged to hear from Ambassador Eynat Shlein. Ambassador Shlein is the head of Mashav, Israel's International Development Center in the country's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Born and raised in Israel, she joined the Foreign Service as a career diplomat in 1992, specializing in the Middle East region, Israeli-Arab relations, and American affairs. Ambassador Shlein received a bachelor's degree in Middle East history from Tel Aviv University and a master's degree in public administration from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. From 1995 until 1997, she served as second secretary for political affairs at the Embassy of Israel in Amman, Jordan, as well as acting commercial attaché. From 97 to 99, she was consul at the Consulate General of Israel in New England in Boston. From 2000 to 2003, Ambassador Shlein was senior analyst in the Center's political research at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. From 2003 until 2008, she was Minister Counselor for Middle Eastern Affairs at the Embassy of Israel in Washington, D.C., following U.S. foreign policy vis-a-vis the Middle East, as well as bilateral relations with relevant countries. From 2008 until 2010, she was Director of Maghreb, Syria, and Lebanon Affairs. From 2010 until 2015, she was head of Bureau for International Affairs in the Center for Political Research in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And from 2014, also the Deputy Director of the Center. In these capacities, she supervised the research work of the Center's analysts, focusing on international affairs and their impact on the Middle East. From 2015 until 2017, she was ambassador of Israel to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. From 2018 until 2019, she was special envoy for community outreach in the North American Affairs Division. And prior to assuming her current role leading Mashav from 2019 until 2020, she was the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Deputy Director General for African Affairs. Ambassador Shlein, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David. It's a pleasure to be here. tonight for me, this afternoon for you, and hello from Israel. When I thought of this topic, I thought that we should actually ask, what is really the meaning of humanitarian assistance? I mean, obviously, when we say humanitarian assistance, immediately we think of the immediate response to a crisis, natural disasters, and so on.
We're sorry for the technical difficulties. Hopefully we can go back to Ambassador Shlein in a few minutes. We'd like to now shift to Yotam Polizer. Yotam Polizer is the CEO, as I had mentioned, of IsraAID, Israel's biggest humanitarian NGO, currently active in 15 countries, including Israel, the United States, and Italy, providing vital support to communities affected by COVID-19. Following the September 2015 refugee crisis in Europe, Yotam led IsraAID's humanitarian mission in Lesbos, Greece, to support Syrian refugees on the island, and he also established IsraAID Germany, which provides long-term support for Yazidi and Syrian refugees in that country. During the last 10 years, Yotam has built and led psychoeducation programs in Japan following the 2011 earthquake and tsunami, in the Philippines after Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, and in South Korea to support the reintegration of North Korean defectors. He has also led missions in Nepal following the 2015 Gorkha earthquake, and in Sierra Leone for Ebola survivors, health workers, and affected communities. Yotam Polizer has more than 10 years experience in education, humanitarian aid, and international development. Yotam, with apologies for those technical issues, which hopefully won't now be repeated. Thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David. I hope you can all hear me fine. I'm actually calling you not from Israel, which is where I live, but actually from Japan, where I'm currently visiting with my, what I call my Japanese wife. We met in the tsunami in Japan, and I always recommend disaster dating to all of you. But I want to first thank B'nai B'rith and Ellen, who is a close friend, and we actually spent time together in Japan after the tsunami in 2011 in Fukushima, and also B'nai B'rith as an organization who's been really a long-term partner of IsraAID and really supported the organization when it was just a startup, an idea, a vision. And now, as mentioned, we're the leading humanitarian organization out of Israel. I also want to thank Mashav, but I'll wait hopefully when Ambassador Eynat can join us. I'll share my screen because I would like to share a few stories and pictures and images that will help tell the story about the organization. So let's hope that won't be a problem. Can you all see my screen? It's fine? Great. Yofi. So my humanitarian career at IsraAID started with this picture that I took 4 days after the tsunami in Japan in 2011. And we were there, and actually Ellen and B'nai B'rith was supporting and joining us there. And you know, apart from this unbelievable devastation, and in case you were wondering, this boat was not, you know, originally parking there. This is a town that was devastated by a 120-foot wave of tsunami. But it's still Japan. It's the third largest economy, and we're coming from a small country like Israel. And to be honest, we were not sure what kind of support we can give Japan. And we realized that this building that you see here in the center, this yellow building, was actually a kindergarten. And during the tsunami, 8 children lost their lives and 1 teacher. And you know, the Japanese government were extremely efficient. They immediately built a new kindergarten. It actually looked better than the old one. But what they didn't have, and unfortunately, we have a lot of in Israel, is trauma and emotional support. I say unfortunately because the reason we became world expert is not because of good reason. It's because of the ongoing trauma of the Holocaust and the conflict. But we realized that the knowledge that we gained in Sderot or in Kiryat Shmona, supporting children after trauma, could be extremely helpful to support these Japanese children their parents and their teachers. So from this tiny kindergarten in a small town in Fukushima, we developed this program that supported over 50,000 people in 10 different cities in Japan following the tsunami. And it's a program that continued not only during the immediate relief, but actually for 7 years, when we ended up training 3,000 teachers, social workers, and volunteers from Japan, because our goal was not just to provide them with the fish, but to really teach them how they could fish and how they can eventually support themselves. So I spent 3 years running this program in Japan. And after 3 years, another disaster hit another part of the world, sort of in the same neighborhood, the typhoon in the Philippines in 2013. So again, I led a relief mission, a medical mission to the Philippines. And from this medical mission, it turned into a 5 years program to provide agriculture support, water and sanitation, and medical support for thousands in the affected area. The next year, after the disaster in the Philippines, a whole different disaster kind of hit the world, the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. And I was there at the peak of Ebola. And I have to tell you, to share with you that, you know, with the stress of COVID, when I think about the Ebola, it helped me put things in perspective. Because when I first landed in Sierra Leone back in 2014, the survival rate was 40%. And another insight that I can share from the Ebola work was that, you know, we're not a group of scientists, so we were not developing a vaccine. The Ebola vaccine actually came much later, about 3 years in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. But we realized that through, again, community resilience program developed in Israel, we could really help the affected communities in Sierra Leone and also later in Liberia to prevent the spread of Ebola. And together with other organizations, UN organization and others, it was a really global effort, but we were able to stop the spread of the virus in less than a year. After 2014, after the situation was sort of under control, I moved to another disaster, which is to lead our search and rescue mission after the earthquake in Nepal in 2015. I didn't share that in my bio, but before joining IsraAID, I actually worked for another organization called Tevel B'Tzedek in Nepal, and I was also working for the Israeli embassy. And I learned Nepalese, which, you know, you all agree is a very useful language. I did not think I will use it after leaving Nepal in 2011, but it ended up extremely useful when I led a search and rescue mission in Nepal in 2015. And with these language skills and with an excellent group of search and rescuers from Israel, we were able to actually find and rescue the last survivor of the Nepalese earthquake, who was a lady who was trapped under the rubble for 6 days without food or water. Her name is Krishna, and that's how she looked today when she's back with her kids in the village in the Himalaya. After Nepal, we responded to the refugee crisis and specifically worked a lot with Yazidi refugees and with Syrian refugees. The Yazidi refugees escaped from ISIS following the genocide. And this is a picture of me carrying a Syrian refugee who almost lost her life. Very interestingly, her father told me after this medical operation, he said, "My worst enemy became my biggest supporter." And then COVID came. And now it's in my capacity as the CEO of the organization. And to be very honest, I was extremely concerned when COVID arrived for two reasons. First, because I was worried about the safety of my staff, of our staff around the world in 16 countries. But I was also concerned that unlike all these other disasters, we were able to be first on the ground. In the COVID, we couldn't fly. There were flight restrictions. We are not, again, we're not developing a vaccine, and we're not a factory to produce masks. So we really were not sure how we could be impactful. It started for us back in February, almost a year ago, when we got a request for support from some hospitals in China who were really lacking equipment at that time. Again, it's hard to imagine right now, but we actually shipped relief supplies and protection equipment from Israel to China. And then in March, when it became a global pandemic, we realized we have to respond in each of our countries of operation. We also realized that because our work is not just immediate relief, but it's long-term support, we have incredible teams on the ground who were already well-trained in disaster relief. So this is example, for example, in Colombia, where we focusing our support on Venezuelan refugees. And this is our team that include Israelis, Colombian and Venezuelan refugees distributing hygiene items to people in the refugee settlements. And again, just to put things in perspective, I know in the US and also in Israel, at some point during this pandemic, we were feeling the shortage of protective equipment, ventilators, etc. In these communities in Colombia or in Kenya or in South Sudan, people didn't have access to clean water. In these camps in Colombia, there was one water tap for every 5,000 people. So just to put things in perspective. So our work was very basic, providing people with basic sanitation, basic hygiene items, and access to clean water. This is from Mozambique. We also realized that we have to fight the infodemic and make people aware in their language of how they can prevent the spread of the virus. So this is actually from the Pacific country of Vanuatu, where we did a whole campaign to help people fight the spread of the virus. But again, it wasn't only in developing countries or in the global south. We actually had a massive response in the US. So this picture is actually a doctor from LA who was volunteering with IsraAID team in food banks to help combat the food shortage, the food insecurity that a lot of communities in the US felt because of the economic crisis that came as a result of this pandemic. So we had about 250 volunteers that reached over 1 million people only in the US in food banks over the last year during our Corona response. So just a little background about IsraAID. I know we're running out of time, so I'll do it very shortly. So we're an Israeli nonprofit, we're non-governmental and we're non-political. We were founded in 2001. We are operating in 52 countries. We're currently active in 14, and we're based on the Israeli innovation and know-how. And we're bringing from Israel the search and rescue, the water technology, the medical services, the trauma care, and all of these assets that we're bringing from Israel. Again, it's not because the situation is so great. It's because of the challenges that we faced as a country, as a nation since our establishment that helped us develop this expertise and bring it to the world's most vulnerable communities. I want to just finish with sharing a few images of how this work can sometimes turn into an interesting soft diplomacy, because I know that's part of the discussion today. So this is actually in Germany, of all places, where Merkel selected IsraAID as for the 2018 Integration Prize for the support we were giving Yazidi refugees and Syrian refugees in Germany. So think about it. It's the German chancellor selecting an Israeli organization for helping refugees 70-something years after the Holocaust. You cannot make this stuff up. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Yotam, for that presentation and for all of the extraordinary work, really extraordinary, that IsraAID does. I'd like to see if we can shift back now in our time remaining to Ambassador Shlein. Ambassador, we're not sure what the causes are in the Zoom era of these glitches, but we hope it'll be smooth sailing from here. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. I apologize. Zoom just died on me, but we've done a few things here at home. Hopefully it will stay stable. So I started speaking about the nature of humanitarian assistance and what does it really mean. And I was going to talk to you as I'll walk you through a presentation at the looking into the fields and the areas in which Mashav excels for its 62 years of existence, and how we adapted these traditional methods into the working in time of COVID-19. So I want to start. I will share my screen in a second. Now, I hope you can see that. And here we go. So all in all, when we think of Mashav, Mashav has been there forever, and we've been dealing with international development cooperation. And when we look at ourselves, at our mission, what is the core of our mission? It is to empower individuals and so on, and to share our expertise and all of these and knowledge and all of these wonderful things that Yotam already talked about, which I think we share as two similar organizations, whether governmental or non-governmental. But what we take pride of is our consistent work in capacity building. There are many aid agencies in the world, be it the USAID or the German GIZ or the Japanese JICA and many others, but they can offer much bigger support packages, and they have bigger budgets. But what we are known for, our brand, is for capacity building. And this is what we've been doing for many years. So, you know, when we first started, we took our inspiration from the forefathers of the State of Israel. And you can see all these wonderful quotes from Herzl and Ben-Gurion, but it was really Golda Meir that had the vision after a visit in West Africa in '58, where she thought of building up an agency, creating an agency when she was the foreign minister to assist the developing world. So we've been active for many years throughout the world, as you can see. And during these years, we've been focused on various topics. You know, we do projects, we do training, we bring in people to Israel. You can see the data on the screen, but we do a lot of international development. And when you look at the priority sectors of Israel, now let's start thinking about these priority sectors and COVID-19. Food security is the first one. We've been engaged for years. However, the pandemic has really raised the fences between countries. Borders that were open, which were open for years, were re-erected. There were very little flights, very little cargo going in between countries. And we've seen hunger in remote places, or even in the continent of Africa, which was not as affected as Europe, for example, you know, thinking of the volume of people infected by COVID-19. However, there were no flights, there was hunger in many places, and we started responding by delivering assistance, food packages, providing support to specialists through webinars over the net, continuing our instruction work, and working together with countries to better their situation. So yeah, we're going back to the sectors. However, if we look at other areas that we do, education, throughout the pandemic, we sent lots of assistance to developing countries in order to provide access to education to children. We have donated thousands of laptops and all sorts of equipment to classes, and sharing our methods of remote studying. If we think of medicine and public health, and emergency preparedness, these are things we do, again, throughout our history. However, in this regard, we have brought together seniors in the public health system, Israeli specialists, together with people in the developing countries, creating virtual tables for consultations. We've also distributed lots of equipment, protective equipment especially, throughout the world. We also work together with some of our innovation partners around the world in order to provide protective gears. Now, and this is valid to all of the other priority sectors that we talked about. When we think of Israel and the way that we work, so when we work around the world, we try and do and make connections. We build networks. We teach people. We instruct them. We keep in touch with them. We provide them grants for projects once they come home. We do short-term exchanges, consultancies, courses in Israel, and all of this work, which has a very strong element of physical training, training the trainers on the spot, bringing Israel, visiting those in need abroad by sending our instructors, but working in the hospital, in the field, showing technologies, and we couldn't do any of this during the pandemic. So normally we train people with our 3 centers, the Center for Agricultural Training, Carmel Center for Gender and Innovation, and and our Ofri Center for Educational Training. We had to readapt and transform ourselves from 0 to 100, as we say in Hebrew, all in just a few weeks. And we have moved all of our training and instruction activity to the virtual world. We had to reinvent ourselves in 2 major ways. First of all, we do mostly capacity building and some humanitarian assistance in case of emergencies. We had to change the balance here, and about 85% of our budget was geared now to humanitarian assistance around the world. And the rest of it went into virtual training, which of course is cheaper than bringing people here to Israel or sending our trainers abroad. And we adapted. In the past year, we've held hundreds of webinars and many dozens of online seminars talking about anything from education to women empowerment to small businesses, entrepreneurship, community policing, and so on and so forth, all online and all through the situation of closure. At the same time, we work together with our partners around the world, trying to hold hands and work together to bring in support to those in need. If we're speaking of assistance in the field of medicine, for example, in the Ivory Coast, we've donated technologies and also budgets to the Pasteur Institute dealing with Corona, the only place in the Ivory Coast where they could actually test people for the virus and treat them in hospitals. In the Ukraine, in Chernovtsi, we have contributed a laboratory for the detection of the COVID-19. In Georgia, we held hands with the WHO and we supplied the local health ministry with special tents to provide emergency clinics in rural areas. We also worked with many other partners around the world, trying to maximize our possibilities. So, when we think of Israeli courses, of Mashav's courses in Israel, all of them are very holistic in their approach. And think about it, how do you adapt this to COVID-19 time? You talk to people and you're supposed to train them and provide them with a road ahead and with knowledge. However, the world is changing as we speak, and we live in a reality of complete uncertainty. And yet, our very trained and skilled leaders in our training centers were able to invent themselves and create these tailor-made courses which would deal with the COVID-19 reality. So, of course, in normal years, you would have, thousands of people from various countries participating in courses in Israel, and you would have many of them being trained abroad. But of course, we couldn't bring them here, so we trained them online. And I'm proud to say that we have trained over 1,000 people just in the past few months, and that is wonderful. So when we speak of adapting ourselves during the pandemic, in Georgia, for example, we had this long-term project of enhancing vegetable production. I brought you this slide because I think it's very telling and it has lots of details. However, we do this in various countries, and while doing so, we're not just teaching skills of vegetable growing in this regard, but also work on microfinancing and women empowerment and many other worthy goals. However, how do you do this when you're unable to fly and you're unable to bring people? So we have this project that we launched with the Pacific Islands after the visit of President Rivlin there last year, and we promised to teach them and share our knowledge in vegetable production for these island countries. And what we found ourselves doing is teaching them virtually. That is, in each one of these countries, they sat in a kind of a model farm or a model field where they started growing vegetables without training. So we have a trainer in Shfaim, Israel, in Mashav Center, who is growing vegetable in a field, and he works with all the most advanced techniques. And as he's working the field, he has his laptop with him and his camera, and he's broadcasting live on certain areas, and he is teaching the trainees in the Pacific Islands online. They can see what he's doing, and he's also looking at their own fields through his laptop. So that's an innovation for you. In another way, we looked into the special needs. Special needs, just like, you should think of how to get to clean water during the pandemic. You should also deal with children with special needs, and you should deal with the need to innovate. So we've done many things in this regard around the world. That is, in Uzbekistan, where we see today, we assisted in opening a virtual theater for children staying at home. Our embassy was very involved in this. We've done in Chile, we contributed a special class for children with disabilities where they could get access even through pandemic times to their classrooms. In East Kazakhstan, for example, we launched together with local partners a rehabilitation center for children on the autistic spectrum. This is something which is even more exciting when you think about it, because it is a project that was built by Mashav's graduates, two Mashav graduates, which studied in Israel only a year and a half ago, and they went back to Kazakhstan and they built this center where they are teaching kids with special needs using Israeli methodologies in order to integrate them in the general system. So we set their special classrooms with helping them to gain capabilities in speech and capabilities in integrating through sensors activities and create the development of of their motoric skills. So that's just one example, but again, pandemic times, one needs to be creative. We also distributed a lot of wheelchairs to children with special needs together with an Israeli NGO that specializes, Wheels of Hope, that specializes in wheelchairs of hope, which has a special technique to build wheelchairs adapted for children. And one of the last things I want to mention here is that when we speak of humanitarian assistance, I kept on using the term innovation. Well, innovation is what we excel in and we're proud of. So what you see here are pictures from some of our projects in Africa. At the bottom left side, bottom right hand side, you see the printing of 3D, the printing of protective gears for medical staff, which we printed together with Mashav graduates in innovation classes with a 3D printer in Dakar, Senegal. We've multiplied this project, which combined a data file contributed by an Israeli high school computer lab to each country that wanted to have this project, together with our Mashav graduated. And through 7 or 8 countries in Africa, we have printed hundreds of thousands of these special masks protecting.
Unfortunately, I think we're experiencing some issues again on Ambassador Schlein's side. Hopefully she'll be able to rejoin, and I understand that we had trouble seeing the slides that she was referencing. So I'd like to ask her for any additional resources that she'd like to commend online or otherwise to our audience. I don't know, Ambassador Shlein, if you can see and hear me at the moment, but notwithstanding the issues, we thank you for what was a very informative overview and really for all of the work that you and your colleagues do. It's incredibly impressive to get just a small snapshot of the work done by Mashav and by Israel's humanitarian sector more generally. We now have just a few minutes left for questions. As a reminder, if you haven't already, participants can submit questions by clicking on the Q&A button on your screens. And please do indicate if your question is directed to a particular member or members of our panel, and we'll be monitoring the screen to see if Ambassador Shlein is able to rejoin. So at this point, I'd like to ask my colleague, Oren Drury, our program officer for United Nations Affairs, to begin relaying questions received from our international audience. So Oren, please.
Yes, we have a question for Yotam from Michael Kornblit from Oklahoma, who wanted to know, how do you recruit volunteers and how do you choose which places to go to?
Yeah, I saw this question and I was actually really moved because apparently Joanne, I guess, or Michael was actually joining us and joining our teams as volunteers when we responded in 2013 to the tornado in Oklahoma. So that was beautiful to see. And again, it was a terrible tornado, but an opportunity to build bridges. How do we recruit? We recruit both in Israel and also in the US and in our different countries of operations through our website. And it's very easy. You go to the Join Us section. We also recruit a lot for our outreach event. In fact, our director of outreach is here with us and she helped put this event together, Rachel Wallace. And every volunteer professional we recruit has to go for a training. Now these trainings are done mostly online, but also in person. And based on their availability and the expertise and the need, we will send them to the field. And again, it could be in their communities in the US or globally when needed. How do we choose where to go is based obviously on the scale of the disaster and the needs. The gaps that we identify, meaning that if our expertise, whether it's the trauma or the water technology, could actually fill these gaps. Partners, which is a key, and I think Ellen briefly mentioned that, and partners could be governments, civil society organization, faith-based organization. We partner with a lot of Christian organizations and churches, around the world, for example, and obviously available funding. The good news about funding is that now we have our emergency response fund, thanks to a generous group of donors, that allows us to respond immediately and being able to reach the affected areas within the first 72 hours, regardless of funding. And in the past, B'nai B'rith has been really a key partner for us in helping providing these immediate funds to allow us to go there directly and immediately. And I think the last question was about our funding sources, whether we receive government funding. So yes, we do receive some government funding from the German government, from the Australian government, and also recently from Mashav, from the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So hope that answers the questions.
Oren, next questions?
Yeah, I see that Ambassador Shlein is back, although I'm not sure if she is fully with us or not. So I was wondering for all, if you look beyond the pandemic, what do you see as the greatest human development need in the next decade, and how are you training people to meet this need now?
Yotam, I think you can feel free to start on that one.
Okay. Look, I think the climate issue is not something that we can ignore, and we have seen. In fact, I don't know who mentioned the term natural disasters, but at IsraAID we actually don't call these disasters natural disasters. These are nature-related events. And they turn into a disaster when the local government or the local community don't have the capacity to manage that. So for us at IsraAID, helping communities not only respond to disasters, but to do what we call disaster risk reduction is our ultimate goal. Because we know in many parts of the world, these nature-related events are happening now more and more. On an annual basis, we're seeing much more hurricanes, much more typhoons, wildfires, etc. So for us, this is really the number one priority, helping these communities reach a situation where the disaster that they experience could turn into an opportunity to build back better and to prepare better for the next disaster. And we actually seen that in the pandemic, where a lot of these communities that experienced these disasters over the last few years and received intensive training from IsraAID were much better prepared to deal with the pandemic, which is obviously a different disaster, but it is definitely a humanitarian crisis.
Oren, I think we have time for just one more question. And we looks like Ambassador Shlein has rejoined us. If we can, Ambassador Shlein, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. It's a bit of a choppy connection, but we can. Thank you so much for your presentation, and we're sorry for the technical hiccups. Ambassador Shlein, as I mentioned earlier, you may have disconnected. We weren't able to see your slides. So if you have, unfortunately, if you have any online resources that you'd like to direct our audience to, we've been getting messages expressing interest in that. Please feel free to do that. Oren, did you have a final question?
So I'll just say,
sure, please.
May I just say something, please, David?
Please, Ambassador.
Yeah, first of all, I'm sorry that you didn't see my presentation. One of my colleagues called me when I got tossed off the of the call. So I'm sorry, I would have rather spoken without the presentation. I'm sure it sounds quite lame if you don't see the pictures, but nevertheless, I will send you a few links. David, if you could just share it with the participants, as you have their emails. I want to apologize for the technical hiccups. It rains cats and dogs in here. Maybe that is the reason. At any rate, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm sorry we couldn't speak some more, but I saw the presentation of Yotam Polizer, which was very impressive in my view, and I fully appreciate it. And I'm glad you saw it. And you could trust me when I tell you that Mashav is fully engaged in humanitarian assistance, and at a different time, maybe in a different weather. And with the Zoom's grace, we'll be able to share some more of Mashav's work. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. You know, we had to use our imagination at a few moments, but that aside, your message really came through loud and clear. And we're grateful for all the very impressive work that Mashav does. Oren, do you have a final question, perhaps for the Ambassador and the other panelists while we have them?
Actually, for the Ambassador, Mark Hatfield has a question on the size of Mashav's current budget and also the current working relationships with UN agencies and USAID.
Thank you for this question. I'll answer, it's a few questions, actually, it's a bundle of questions. So I'll start and say that we always aspire to reach out and work together with other agencies, as obviously you can achieve a lot more when you have partners, NGOs and other governmental agencies. We actually have a signed memorandum of understanding with the USAID, which was discussed for years, and it's about to be implemented. And I truly hope, I heard yesterday that there are new nominations planned for the USAID, and I truly hope that we can work together with the USAID to achieve the goals which we share, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. As for, and that is valid for every other national or international organization. As for the budget, that's a sensitive question, you know. Probably the Zoom god will get me offline just for that. We were blessed with a nice influx of funds in the last half of the year. One minister, and he brought with him funds which allowed all this work. You haven't seen the pictures, unfortunately, but in 6 months we've worked and distributed assistance all over the world. And one thing that I wanted to say, and you've missed my last, you didn't see any of my slides, but the last one actually showed the benefit of Mashav specifically in this regard, where our graduates using innovation were helping their own countries, and we paid for their inventions. For example, in Senegal, where they actually printed, again with the 3D printer, printed automatic devices to wash your hands, which were installed in every public corner. So I think that, you know, sometimes you could think of worldwide operations and planes and cargos and what have you, but sometimes it's this little story that can make a difference. And I was very proud of that specific grant for that person. And thank you for your questions. I do hope that next year, after the elections, we'll have a wide budget that would actually support Mashav's mission to assist and Israel's main goal to bring in some more tikkun olam via Mashav. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. You know, there's a saying in Hebrew, Al tiftach pe Satan. Those Zoom gods that you had referenced, I think, kicked in just a little bit there, just as you were discussing the budget. But we'll leave that as is for now, and we're happy to share resources with our audience. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I really, on behalf of B'nai B'rith and my colleagues, Alex King, who's been doing a tremendous job behind the scenes, and Oren Drury, I'd like to thank, and on behalf of our audience, all of our distinguished speakers, Ambassador Eynat Shlein, Yotam Polizer, and Alan Schneider for being with us and for shedding light on Israel's remarkable humanitarian work around the globe. And we really want to thank all of you from around the world for joining, particularly international diplomats from multiple UN hubs who have taken the time to participate in this program. B'nai B'rith is the world's oldest Jewish communal and advocacy organization set apart by members on the ground on 6 continents and a pioneering role and longstanding presence at the UN, in fact, from the time of the very founding of the UN. So we take pride in our partnerships with you, and we take pride in the work that was discussed today. A recording of this conversation will be available on our YouTube channel shortly. For now, we look forward to seeing all of you on future programs. Thank you.